Good evening, friends. Today we are having a very special guest, Mr. Owen Alterman, who is Senior Special Correspondent for International Affairs of ITV 24, that's Israeli News Channel. And it will be a two-sided dialogue wherein I will be asking him questions regarding Israel and India, and also geopolitical affairs. And he will be asking me questions related to India and Israel, as well as India and geopolitics. Today there is a very special guest with us. He is our friend Owen Alterman, and he is Senior International Affairs Correspondent of I-24 News Israel. Welcome, Owen.
Very, very good to be with you. Thank you so much.
Owen, we consider you guys, that Israelis, as our all-weather friends. And there is a special place in our heart, in India's heart, for Israel, because you guys have always stood with us. Let it be during the wars, you have supplied us with the equipment. Let it be with the supply of technology. We are, you have proved yourself that you are all-weather buddy. What's the feelings regarding India and Israel?
A great feeling. And Dr. Sheikh, it's so multidimensional. Obviously, at the level of government to government, the military industry and the defense industry is obviously very, very important. But at the people to people level, I think it's really the tourism that stands out. Obviously, so many young Israelis travel to India. It has almost mythic status culturally.
Yes.
Indian soft power is just so prevalent and so strong here in Israel. And obviously at the middle level, that's both people to people and government to government. Obviously the issue of agriculture and water, which is so important to India. And as for supporting each other, don't forget what's happened even during this pandemic, that just about a month ago, India supplied Israel with what were at that time thought to be supplies for that essential drug, hydroxychloroquine. Turned out in the end to be a little less than essential, but obviously very, very well regarded here. So obviously, thank you very much.
First of all, I will like to congratulate you and all Israelis for your new government. Finally, you guys formed a government after 3 consecutive elections in 1 year.
It feels weird. That's the only way to say it. I was at the Knesset yesterday for the swearing in, and it is in some sense surreal. Obviously, the fact of this happening against the backdrop of the pandemic is itself surreal. But the fact that we actually have a government and we're calling all of these people ministers, where we had called them politicians and leaders of parties over the course of a year and a half, it is a very different feeling, and we will see where it all leads.
I wish for the success of the government, and I wish that under this new regime, that is Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, we will come more closer, even closer, India and Israel. And some of my generalist friends, they were really frustrated. They were of the thought that there will be a 4th time election, because journalists are the people who have to be on the street 24/7 then. I think your condition is the same.
They said there couldn't be a second election, and there was. There couldn't be a third election, and there was. So at some level, you said to yourself, why not a 4th election? But it didn't come to pass, obviously.
Great. And how are you dealing with what is the condition of COVID-19 right now in Israel?
On the health numbers are fantastic. They're better than the best case scenarios for the experts here. We have almost no new cases, literally, and every day hundreds of people who have recuperated and have recovered. So the numbers are going down every day. The exit strategy, the reopening strategy has been put on turbo drive to the extent that schools have opened fully yesterday.
Fully?
And in the original, fully. People are supposed to wear masks, and there's a bit of a problem right now because we have a heat wave, and the kids are supposed to be socially distanced, a little bit difficult in the very large Israeli classrooms. The experts understand that those rules in the real world aren't necessarily going to be fully honored, but they went ahead with the reopening of the schools anyway, both because the numbers seem to be that good, and obviously the economic impetus for opening schools is so strong as it is in other countries. The economic aspects, obviously this is a multidimensional crisis. It's not only about health. The economic numbers in Israel are as bad as they are everywhere. A quarter of the workforce is unemployed. Now, maybe that's
Yeah.
changed. Retail is basically open fully, for example. Private kindergartens are now allowed to open fully. So huge sectors of the economy that are reopening. So maybe those numbers will get better. The society has stayed together for the most part, with a couple exceptions on the margins in terms of relations with the ultra-Orthodox community, the Haredi community here. But society has stayed together. The coronavirus crisis indirectly, again, I want to emphasize indirectly, in my view, resolved the political crisis by making a fourth election very risky for both of the main
Yeah.
political players, and they wanted to be risk
Yes.
averse, so they came to an agreement. So on the whole, it's a success story here, but as we all know, this is not over. And certainly on the health front, it's very much not over. Prime Minister Netanyahu made that very clear in the first meeting of the government yesterday. So there's still a lot to be done. And this is very, very unpredictable.
You guys are working on that monoclonal antibodies, your top secret lab. It is working on those monoclonal antibodies. So what's the progress?
Listen, the Biology Institute announced that there's progress. That's obviously a good thing. This could be a treatment for people who are already sick. There's also work being done in Israel on a potential vaccine, as there is in many, many places. There's reported to be some progress on that. But as we know, these are long roads, both the treatment route and the vaccine route. So we'll have to see. The other route that's important to watch here is what's happening in the defense sector, where they are working on technologies to help identify who's sick and who's not sick. And that's going to be very, very important, because that could potentially enable us to open up the economy, even if there is a second wave, and be able to separate the sick and the well without keeping everybody home. And for example, testing. You would be able potentially to have tests that could be scalable, done on a mass scale, that will tell you instantly if you're sick or if you're not sick. And once you have a test like that, you can reopen the economy. Just put those tests at the entrance to public buildings and to workplaces. And then you can separate who's sick from who's not sick, again, without having to shut down entire economies. And that in itself can go a long way to resolving the crisis. So watch the space on that. That, from my layman's perspective, that seems to be, and I say this with great caution, seems to be the route where Israel has the greatest likelihood to have real success that could have international impact. But again, we'll see. Obviously, it's full speed ahead in every route here, just as it is everywhere.
You mean those rapid antibody test?
The antibody test, the vaccine, and these identification technologies that don't treat the disease, but they tell you who has it, which is, as we all know, it's essential. We just don't have those tools right now, which is why we have to keep everybody at home. Because you walk down the street, I just went to the mall.
Yeah.
I have no idea who's sick and who's not sick. Nobody does. If we did, then the people who are sick would be at home or isolated, and the people who are not sick could go about their business. And that in itself could greatly, almost entirely, reduce the economic harm and go a great way toward resolving this. So again, we'll have to see. We don't have those tools yet. Hopefully, if the climate has an impact, I'm actually interested in asking you about that, what you know about that from India. But if the climate has an impact and this dies down over the summer, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, and comes back in the Northern Hemisphere winter, hopefully by then we'll have more tools to deal with this. And for all of the fear about a second wave being worse, you know, Dr. Sheikh, this isn't 1918 in that sense. We are able to make technological advancements much more quickly, which means that a second wave here could be much better than a first wave, unlike 100 years ago.
Oh yeah, and India is working on the same thing. We are optimistic that by the month and we will be producing ample number of rapid antibody test kits in India, domestic production, and also we are also working on the same type of app on which you are using, that which identifies where is the movement of the sick person.
Amazing.
Who's affected with, yeah. Okay, when we are talking about coronavirus, just I want to ask you, what is the sentiment regarding China there in Israel? Let it be government or let it be in public?
Well, it's a very, very sensitive issue here because of the triangle of Israel, China, and the United States. First of all, I have to say, the Chinese ambassador was found dead in his residence yesterday. No evidence that there was anything criminal behind it, but obviously a huge tragedy. And, it's just an unfortunate thing that comes against the backdrop of everything that's going on in the world.
Unfortunate, yeah.
As you may have caught, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made his first foreign trip of the coronavirus era, or at least since the heart of the peak of the coronavirus crisis, to Israel, a snap visit. And one of the major issues on the agenda, maybe even the major issue on the agenda, was exactly this. He does not want China to be involved in infrastructure projects in Israel. And China is involved in infrastructure projects in Israel. Because China's very good at infrastructure. There's no way around it. They know how to build things and run things in ways no other countries do. I was actually part of a delegation of Israeli journalists and government spokespersons to China last summer. And the Chinese took us to the Shanghai port, or part of the Shanghai port. The Shanghai port's enormous. And it is just spectacular what they're able to do with ports. So it's natural for Israel to want that kind of efficient technology. But the United States is not very happy about that, and at least in certain projects. And obviously, the U.S. relationship is essential to Israel. So this is something that the government has to manage, has to balance the need for Chinese technology and the relationship with the rising power with Israel's essential relationship with the United States. Obviously, a lot of hard decisions to be made, and
Yes.
the government's going to have to make them. At the public level, there's not a huge backlash against China here at the level of public opinion. It's not that kind of issue here the way it is everywhere. The Chinese are not seen as taking, for example, Israeli jobs the way they are in the United States. And they're not viewed as a geopolitical threat to Israel the way that they are in parts of Asia, an issue that's familiar to you in India. I really want to ask you about that. So it's not a public opinion issue here, very much a policymaker issue.
You are right, but so I think when Mr. Pompeo came there, apart from annexation of West Bank and Jordan Valley, I think Haifa, the leasing of Haifa port must have also been discussed, because Israel want to lease it to Chinese for 25 years, and United States is definitely worried about their sixth fleet.
Absolutely.
From there.
Yes.
So what do you feel? Will the Israel be able to lease or not?
I don't know. I think that, again, these are tough decisions. Israel has to balance. The relationship with the U.S. is essential. And at the end of the day, that's the decisive factor, probably. But listen, a relationship with China is very important. This is a rising power. It's a huge economy. I don't have to tell you that. And Chinese infrastructure is very good. They know how to build these things. They know how to run these things. Chinese involvement in a desalination plant here has also been controversial with the U.S. That, according to many reports, is something that Pompeo raised, and the Israeli government said the Chinese would not be involved in. Again, watch this space. This is a developing story. It's not going to be resolved this week. This is a story to watch for years to come.
Yeah, and I think the Cold War 2 has officially begun right now. And Israel is out of, I think, 13 of your high-tech companies, high-tech technological companies, 7 or 6 are based upon Chinese investment. So you guys have to make a very fine, delicate balance between China and the United States.
Absolutely. Obviously, we're not the only ones caught in this game. By no means. But it's sensitive here, not because China is a threat, but because the relationship with the United States is so important. And that may be what makes Israel a little different than the situations in some other countries. But listen, we're adjusting to some degree to a multipolar world, or let's say a bipolar world, to take off of what you were saying. And it's a tough adjustment. These are tough decisions for policymakers. But those are the parameters of the debate here. And it's going to be very, very interesting to watch and something I guess be part of, all of us as citizens, and in my case as journalists.
You are a journalist, but you are an Israeli friend of ours. And just it's not a political question, just a personal question, very personal question, because we are also allies of United States. We are definitely leading the non-aligned movement, but we are allies, very good friends with our United States. And it looks to me that United States is personally vacating the global power seat due to their actions, like in Syria, like in Libya, and they are not even having influence on WHO, the toothless body.
Look, I wanted to ask you about the same issue, about how the United States and even Donald Trump personally are being seen in India in this crisis. Look, Israel, the issue of the extent of U.S. involvement in the Middle East is a very important issue of discussion here. Before the pandemic, to some extent during the pandemic, and certainly after the pandemic. But it's not always 100% clear in which direction the United States is going. It seemed that the United States was leaving the Middle East, and then all of a sudden the United States assassinates, or kills, I should say, Qasem Soleimani, the head of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard, and seemed to be coming back in the Middle East. I think, though, that it has to be said as a blip in a longer-term trend where the U.S. is becoming progressively less involved here. Obviously, that's something of concern for Israel. But what we have also seen is, because of the special relationship between the U.S. and Israel and the role that the Israeli issue plays in American politics still, that the United States is more involved in Middle Eastern issues that relate to Israel. But at the same time, it is true Israel has continued to build up independent capabilities, relationships with other countries in the region, as a kind of hedge to the potential of U.S. involvement. So, look, the relationship with the United States is important to Israel. It will be for a very long time to come. But Israel is interested in possessing other relationships, other capabilities. The relationship with India is part of that. The issue of China is part of that. The independent capabilities is part of that. That's, of course, been a topic of global discussion during the pandemic, right? Bringing supply chains home, essential supplies home.
No, let's stop it here, because I'm going to ask in detail later on regarding the same thing. And I can understand the very fine. You have to make a very delicate balance between all the powers. And I don't personally speaking, I don't blame only Trump for this. Even during the Obama years, we were seeing that he was not involving there in Libya. He was not involving in Syria. He was also not spending money the way they should spend upon the international bodies. So I am seeing a shift in the United States policy. God knows why, but personally speaking, I don't want to see personally. It's not my governmental state. Personally speaking, if there is a Chinese domination of the world, maybe the world will be very ugly. At least,
Well, listen, I think we're far from that. Certainly in the Middle East, and I mean the Chinese, have not wanted to get involved as much politically and in terms of security in this region. Their involvement has continued to be economic, although in some cases arguably strategic with these infrastructure projects. But look, Israel obviously wants the United States to be involved, should be said, on its side in Middle Eastern issues, and will continue to try to see that happens. But at the same time, again, try to have independent capabilities, other relationships, and to adjust to the wider geopolitical changes around the world. And that's a point of consensus here in Israel. It's been a major part of Netanyahu's foreign policy over the last few years.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been any real argument with it. Netanyahu's criticized for a lot of things, but he's not criticized for at least wanting good relations with Russia,
foreign policy,
for wanting
with
good relations with China, right, with wanting good relations with India. So this idea of having multiple relationships with multiple powers is something that's a point of consensus here.
What do you think, as a generalist, about the fate of this newly sworn government? Because in Israel, till day, since you got independence, your country was formed, there has been no government who has completed the 4-year term as per your constitution. In average, there is always an election within 2 years. So what do you think about Netanyahu-Gantz combination? How long it will last?
Well, nobody's putting odds on this government lasting 4 years or even 3 years under the original plan. But I think that the balance of the evidence supports the government surviving in the short term, or in Israeli political terms, the medium term. Benny Gantz has a very strong incentive to cooperate here. He is, at least frankly, even in the last 24 hours, trying to build a political argument and a political brand centered on his commitment to national unity. Okay. But that's not a very, in my view, strong independent political brand. I mean, when you're testing whether a government is going to survive, you're testing it against what? Against the option of elections. And for Gantz, the option of elections is frankly not doesn't at this point seem to be at all a very good option, because he can't argue that he can't really draw a contrast between himself and Netanyahu. He's in government with him.
Yeah.
And he can't really necessarily put himself on the same side as Netanyahu, because he has to distinguish himself electorally. So he doesn't seem to have a lot of electoral options, meaning that it seems like this government will stay in power in the short to medium term. Of course, unless, of course, I should say, Netanyahu sees it as his advantage to leave the government. But at least in the short term, that seems an awfully risky proposition, because between the time when the government falls and the election happens are a few months. We have a pandemic and an unpredictable virus, and it seems like an awfully risky bet for any politician. So it seems to me that this government is going to have a lifespan of months and potentially of more than a year. The real test is a year and a half when this rotation is set to happen. Whether Netanyahu will go forward with it, very big question mark over that.
Okay, tell me, Owen, what is your government planning regarding annexation of Jordan Valley and West Bank, and especially after the king of Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, he said that will jeopardize the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan. So, are you going to annex it right now?
Big topic of discussion here. Netanyahu says that he wants to move forward with the annexation. But there are voices in the government that aren't so enthusiastic, from the blue and white party, from the center-left bloc's side. That's, I think, less of a concern for Netanyahu. The greater concern, as you mentioned, the Americans to some degree, and to a greater degree the Jordanians. Netanyahu has to walk a fine line. He wants the political benefits of being seen as supporting annexation, but he may not be willing to go to the finish line on it because of the concern about the diplomatic fallout. So it's a tight balancing act. I think it's not clear at this point exactly which way it's going to go. So I honestly don't know.
Okay.
If I had one to hazard a guess, I would say it's not going to happen. But especially if it is something that Donald Trump sees as being in his interest, and Trump has his own election, maybe that weighs in the scale of it happening. I do think, though, that whatever your position on this, it may, if it happens, be a less consequential event than it's being built up to be. For supporters of this, we've seen in the past that Israel, for example, has annexed the Golan Heights, but less than 20 years later was at the table with Syria of giving it back. So the annexation didn't necessarily determine that area's final status. And the same could be true of these parts of the West Bank. The future government could still negotiate over them with the Palestinians, annexation or not. And on the side of the opponents, and all of the threats of diplomatic blowback and security blowback, we've seen time and again in the Middle East, Dr. Sheikh, that there tend to be two categories of events that really trigger big security backlash. Violence that can often raise emotions, and one can understand why, and activities at holy sites, particularly in Jerusalem. And those can tend to lead to escalations. I say this great caution, because we've never actually seen an annexation of the West Bank in this sense. So that's an unknown, but based on the evidence that's available, may not be as consequential of an event as people are saying. So we'll see if it happens.
One last question from my side.
Sure.
Then the floor is all yours. You can ask me anything you want regarding India.
Excited.
And if you wish, you can deny this question, because, okay, we are politicians, we sometimes deny. You are a journalist, but even then, it's a very tough question. There is a buzz everywhere that Israel is really, really close with major powers of Arab world. What's the reality
of Israel's relations with countries in the Arab world?
Yeah, I'm not even naming the countries. I'm just saying Israel is really close to the governments of those countries.
Oh, sure. Listen, it's an open secret. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's Israel's relations.
Yeah.
Let's say the first important name, Saudi Arabia, it's an open secret. But of course, it's still a secret. There's not as much officially seen as there is constantly reported to be below the radar screen. Below the radar. Yeah, of course. And we saw that conference there last year. It was so long ago. Look, these relationships are very important to Israel. They seem to be important to those countries too. They are, I still think, largely focused on the Iranian issue. And there is, of course, the black swan event out there of some change in the regime in Iran, and that could yet change the relationships between these two countries. On the other hand, the longer these relationships progress and the deeper they become, maybe, I'll say this with a maybe the more sustainable and the more durable they become. But these are very important relationships to Israel. And again, I think that there is a consensus in the Israeli public that people want to see this happen. The point at which the consensus breaks down is if and when, and it really is an if, let alone a when, these countries want concessions on the Palestinian issue in exchange for concessions on their part about making the relationships more public, then the consensus certainly will break down. Although I believe if that were to happen in a serious way from these countries, meaning they were to say, you, Israel, make concessions on the Palestinian issue. We, let's say Saudi Arabia, would in exchange for that make the relationship more public and allow the kinds of relationships and exchanges, for example, travel openly in ways we have in the past. I think the consensus will absolutely break down over the relationship. But I do think that a majority of the public, and including parts of the Israeli right, would be in favor of that kind of trade. And if I were a policymaker in Washington or in Brussels, and I wanted to make peace happen, okay, between Israelis and Palestinians, I would go there. Again, we've seen politicians, we should say in fairness, we've seen policymakers go there in the past, and those Arab countries not necessarily answered that this is a trade that they wanted. But never say never on that front. But in the meantime, yeah, the status quo is these relationships stay underground and stay strong and stay important.
I wish that all these countries must recognize Israel. And why I am telling you, because I read all the international newspapers, major ones, and I am seeing that there is anti-Semitism and rise of anti-Semitism, especially in Europe. So Jews definitely need a country which must be recognized by everybody. So I wish that Arab countries should also recognize Israel and have a very cordial relationship. I was shocked to listen to read one news. You must have also read it. I think some days back, correct people of Croatia, they because of coronavirus, they shifted the ceremony for those Nazi criminals for which they were doing mass gathering to Sarajevo. So what's this? This is anti-Semitism, nothing else. Nobody can like the atrocities of Nazis which they have done, the Holocaust and everything, except until and unless you are an anti-Semitic, purely anti-Semitic, then only you will do mass gathering for them. So I think anti-Semitism is there, and Israel is essential for Jews as a country.
Yeah, if I could just say a couple of things about that, there's so much there. Number one, obviously, anti-Semitism in Europe was a very, very important part of the beginnings of the Zionist movement, the growth of the Zionist movement, the creation of Israel. But I do think it's important to say that Israelis and Jews also see Israel as being important for positive reasons too, as an expression of our culture. Many say of our rights and certainly of our right to self-determination. And so I think it's important to say that too. As for other things, listen, the issue of Holocaust memory in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, is a discussion unto itself. And we could speak for an hour about that. A small war story, I was in the room during a briefing the Prime Minister gave, that Netanyahu gave a year and a half ago in Warsaw that led to a huge diplomatic incident with Poland around that. It's also the only Israeli in the room when the Polish president announced he was signing a very controversial law and gave a press conference on that. Anyway, that's a whole story unto itself and a very, very important one. And obviously, the trends of anti-Semitism in Europe to a significant degree in the United States are certainly of great concern to people here, and in something that's always watched.
No, it is a concern for every humanitarian person. When Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, he was saying that the Holocaust is a bluff. I was writing against him. How can you deny Holocaust when all the things are there? When there are video evidences, there are picture evidences, there are people who have survived that Holocaust. And if you start denying Holocaust, that is bound to happen again.
Right, and the issue here,
again, not to go with anybody. It may happen with anybody, not only Jews. So,
Right, and but not to go too far into this, but it's denial, but it's also what some scholars call Holocaust distortion, and the way the Holocaust merges or intersects, I would say, with those countries' national histories. In the story of Netanyahu, in that briefing that I mentioned in passing, he was actually misquoted, and the small misquoting led to a huge diplomatic incident, and it just shows just how sensitive this issue is, not just to Jews and Israelis, but in those countries too.
I wish that you guys have very cordial relationship with all your neighbors. That's what I wish personally.
We
And
do too.
I can give you advice. You can give it to your leadership. Mr. Narendra Modi, he is having very cordial relationship with Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as the heads of Arab states. So he can always be a good bridge between the two people.
Let's do it. We'd love it.
Now the floor is all yours. You can ask me anything regarding India.
So let's start with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Sketch out what the state of play is in India. I mean, we all read the media, so we're more or less aware of what's going on there. But where do things stand? What do you see as the successes? What do you see as the failures? And no country's record is perfect on this. Certainly not Israel's. It's impossible to manage a pandemic in a perfect way, as we've seen. But where do you see India's successes? Where do you see India's failures? And how do you see this playing out in the next few weeks, or even if you want to go out even a little bit further in the next few months?
See, Owen, for the biggest success India got is the controlling the number of the patients. Many of the academicians, even in the West, they were thinking that millions of people will be affected in India, and that toll will also be in millions. But the way our government imposed the early lockdown, and it is the largest and longest and it's most strongestly done lockdown in the world. The numbers are definitely in control. Death rate is really low, and we have gone up till the level that we have started achieving, which is called what you call it flattening of the curve. And we started with the R0 number. From the R0 number was R4 when we put the first lockdown 1, and now it is somewhere near to 1. Once it is less than 1, R0 number is less than 1, then definitely the virus is defeated and humanity is winning. But still, the biggest trouble with India, biggest problem, or you can say the reason due to which the problems arises is we are 1.2 billion people. And managing 1.32 billion people is a really tough job. Plus, I don't shy to say that we are having limited resources. Money is also an issue. It's not a very rich country, though in terms of economy, we are the 5th largest economy. But if you go to per capita income and spending, which we have to do for a large country and large section of the population, creates problem. That is the main reason behind the problem. But one thing is there, we have managed the crisis very well. You won't find, hardly you will find any picture that hospitals are crowded like we saw the Mount Sinai hospital there in New York, and from Washington the images were coming. Such images we never found here. The death rate, if you will talk, it's really low. There may be multiple reasons behind that, like in Israel. Maybe due to temperature, we never know. Maybe due to the BCGs which we have got. Maybe due to it's a malaria-prone country, and hydroxychloroquines we are taking just from our childhood. There may be multiple reasons. And right now the condition is that we have now we have launched lockdown stage 4, but we are started opening of economy. More than half of the sectors have been opened. We have divided India into 3 type of zones district-wise: red zone, orange zone, and green zone. Green zone is the one where we haven't got a single case in past 14 days. Orange zone, very few cases are there, and red zone, unfortunately, where I am sitting right now, it's a red zone. Red zone, we are having cases. So restrictions are there, full restrictions are there in red zones, limited restrictions in orange zone, and most of the things are open in the green zone. So we are managing well, and by the month end, we are optimistic that we will be producing hundreds of thousands of rapid antibody testing kits domestically. So we can go for bulk testing in institutions, in factories, so that economy will reopen. But one good sign for India is that our rural area, uh, which is having 70% of our population, it is not affected with coronavirus, and due to which the agriculture, which is a big industry, 15% of our GDP, and rural economy consists of 45% of our GDP, including the MSMEs, they are not affected, and the agriculture is not affected. So India is having a food supply of that we can feed our people for 2.5 years if we even don't
Amazing.
grow a single seed. If we don't sow a single seed, then also we can feed the entire country for
Amazing.
2.5 years. That's the power of India. And another power, I am optimistic regarding the economy, because Indian economy is basically internal consumption dependent economy rather than export oriented economy. Export consists just 16% of our GDP. Rest is 84% is domestic. So I think it is like a pause button within 2 quarters. Next 2 quarters will be difficult, but by third quarter, I think the GDP will go up till 3%.
Wow, so much there. It's fascinating to hear just how independent India is in so many ways, and there's been so much talk in international relations circles about the resurgence of this idea of being independent for vital supplies, food, of course, being the most basic of them. That's just incredible. Also, the number on the economy, I just would imagine India, it's just an incredible moment when India's economy passes Britain's, which I know was forecast to happen this year, and you alluded to it yourself,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
finally passes the colonial masters. It must have just been incredible. You mentioned also, obviously, the challenges of managing a pandemic in a developing country, and you can only imagine what those would be, but also how the challenges of managing a pandemic in such a huge country. And one of the things that one of the tools India has at its disposal to manage a country that large is federalism, and the fact that your states have so much power. There's been a lot reported in the national media, for example, in Kerala, and the kinds of steps that the state
Yes,
government there has
Goa,
taken. And
Kerala.
right, sure. And have you seen federalism as an asset or as a liability in managing this crisis? Obviously, it's been a huge subject of discussion in the United States. I'm interested in what the discussion has been in India about whether federalism has been a helpful tool or a hurtful tool in working through this pandemic.
See, what one good thing we achieved during this pandemic, that cooperation between the union government and the state government was seen, and Mr. Modi was taking the opinions from all the chief ministers of various states, and after that only the policies were drafted. So I think that the federal structure of India is a real power, and since India is a vast country, and so much you get the gray matter when you discuss with other parties, other people, other chief ministers and bureaucrats of other states. It gives positive signals, and with this federalism and federal structure and prime minister's federal approach, he has achieved the results. Nobody was everywhere you read what you say, call them that these are the opinion makers, or they are the real epidemiologists and statisticians. They were calculating the numbers will be in millions and millions, and your cemeteries, and they will be outnumbered, but it never happened in India because of this federal cooperation and timely lockdown. Plus, people were very supportive. See, I can tell you one thing. When Prime Minister said uh, public curfew, okay, that first day he said that you impose public curfew. There will be no policing, nothing, but you stay in homes. Entire country was inside. That shows that India cooperates and listens to the top leadership, because leadership is taking decisions in interest of that country, and this is the power of India.
No, it's great. I mean, it's really interesting to see this resurgence of federalism in so many parts of the world. Israel is not a federal country, and a lot of the management of this crisis has been centralized. You could argue
Centralized.
that that's been actually effective here. But there have been places where local governments made a big difference. I did a report from a town called Kiryat Yarim, just west of Jerusalem, and it's a Haredi, an ultra-Orthodox town in that sector of the
Also, yeah,
population, right, had a disproportionate number of cases, as it has in the United States and other parts of the
2000
world
plus
too.
cases. Yeah.
Yeah, and in this town, even though it was that segment of the population, they managed to shut it down very, very quickly because the local council took the initiative. So even in Israel, local government has made a big difference in some places. In terms of the pandemic itself, we both alluded to it. And, in the US, when I was growing up, not even when I was growing up, long before I was growing up, there was a show called the $64,000 question. This may be the $64 trillion question. Maybe that number's too big, but you get my point. Climate. What evidence do you see in India? Because you have an advantage we in Israel don't. You have a lot more climate zones. You have areas that are in the Himalayas. You have areas that are much further south. By and large, the country is hot, of course. But you have deserts. You have jungles. You have dense forest areas. You have mountains. You have different climate zones. And we're all, I don't want to say we're flying blind, but at least flying blurry on this question. But based on the evidence and the indicators that you have available, do you think climate is making a difference? And do you think
Oh,
that is one of
yes.
the advantages that India, for that matter, Israel has had?
Uh, Definitely, it's always an advantage, and this coronavirus crisis has came as a blessing and disguise. It has waken us that we were sleeping, we were damaging our environment, we were damaging our climate. The condition is like that from the state of Bihar, from Himachal Pradesh, or from Punjab. You can see Himalayas. The sky is so clear, the air is so clear, and even in a place like Noida, which is, you can say it's a town of Delhi, very close to 25 kilometers from Delhi. You can see the wildlife coming. You can see the deers coming. In Hyderabad, a place like Hyderabad, a leopard came. So, with the improvement of climate, the way we were harming the ecology and climate, I think this coronavirus is a curse of Mother Nature to the humanity, and climate change has to be done. We have to maintain the climate. Our rivers have become clean, and I tell you with my own personal experience. Uh, uh, because since we are in the lockdown since more than 50 days, I haven't stepped out of my home. I frequently go to my terrace. It's a large terrace, and about 500 meters from my home, there is a petrol station, fueling station, and since all traffic was closed, there were few buses which were organized by the government to bring the laborers and students stuck in other parts. So all of a sudden, there were 50 or 60 buses, and they were all on. So 500 meters apart from my home, when they went for refueling, I was smelling something bad in the air after 50 days. So
Amazing.
I try to understand how much we are playing with this environment. Yeah, every day before coronavirus crisis, before the lockdown, we were thinking all those things as normal. I was going to I was doing jogging in the same environment, and now I am not able to stand on the terrace. They're to a half a kilometer apart. We have heard the climate, and Mother Nature is cursing us to all humans
Right.
globally.
It's so interesting because you gave a great answer and you answered a different question than I had, but it shows, I think, how resonant the climate change issue is in India, even versus Israel, and how much awareness there is in Indian political circles and policy circles of the climate change issue, because because of India's conditions. My question was different and equally, maybe not even equally important, but do you think that this virus is moderated? Its spread is moderated by warmer climates. Again, the northern hemisphere is the temperate zone of the northern hemisphere going into its summer right now. And the big question is, will the virus spread more slowly? Because if it will, then countries can be a lot more aggressive about reopening their economies and have to be a lot less careful. And maybe there's evidence from India. Maybe it's spreading less quickly in colder climates, in parts of the country that have colder climates than it is in parts of the country with warmer climates. Again, we don't really know this. I haven't seen any evidence that scientists are willing to go out there and definitively draw conclusions on this. But what's your feeling on that question? And is that something that you feel you're seeing?
What I am seeing personally and what I am reading also, this virus acts, uh, acts slowly when the temperature is below 30 degree, 3 degree, uh, or it is above 30 degree or 35 degrees. And we are seeing that. See, in Russia, we saw a jump in the coronavirus cases all of a sudden as the temperature rose. Previously, when in December and January, when it was below 3 degrees, there were no cases, hardly any cases were coming. But once the temperature start raising, the number of cases, they are just next to United States. They are having the highest number of cases. Similarly, if you look at India or whole of the South Asia or even Middle East and Israel, because these are all hot countries compared to the places like Italy or the United States or even Great Britain, France, Switzerland. They are colder places. That is the reason. I think it might be one reason. Another reason might be because you are having sunlight. It has ultraviolet rays. UV3 is there. So the surfaces might be sterilizing by the UV3 rays. So that surface spread, it might be a cause behind the rapid spread there in the European countries, because we are suffering that Europe. We are seeing that European countries are really suffering compared to Asian countries, Middle East countries, all the see, even a very sharp contrast you can see. In Iran, we have seen mass graves, which is comparatively colder than adjoining Iraq. Iraq is having somewhere about 100 deaths. So they are just bordering countries, but Iraq is warm. Iran is comparatively colder. Iran is
It's
comparatively colder than Iraq. So it may be temperature which slows the rate, It definitely doesn't kill it, but it slows
no.
the rate. Uh, And another thing can be, I don't know about Israel. Do you use BCG do you give BCG vaccines to your children?
I'm sorry, what do we give what?
Tuberculosis vaccine to children?
We give vaccines, yeah.
Yeah. One more pattern I am seeing. Uh, Countries like India, Russia, now Israel, South Asian countries, even Russia, they are having very low death rate. And all of these countries give BCG vaccines. It might be a reason because compare it with Spain and Portugal. Spain has suffered very badly. Spain has no BCG program, whereas Portugal is also having tourism, same kind of climate, just an adjoining country to Spain, but they are having the BCG program, so the death rate is very low. Similarly, with Russia, India, Nepal, and Israel, low death rate, maybe BCG vaccine may be a cause behind that. We never know.
Yeah, I should be honest. In fair, I don't know about that particular virus vaccine program, whether Israel has it or not, but maybe. And if so, obviously all the better. I'd like to move on and ask you not about the pandemic itself and the management of the pandemic or the virus, a little bit about the social impact and then maybe the geopolitical impact. Obviously, a major issue in India coming into this pandemic and something that's gotten a lot of attention internationally in recent years, intercommunal relations between Hindus and Muslims. There was reporting at the beginning, at the early stages of the pandemic, that the dynamics of the virus and the fact that it had spread initially from a big Muslim gathering had led to an escalation and a more tension in the intercommunal relations. What's the latest on that? And where do you think that very, very sensitive issue for your country is headed?
See, right now things are very much normal, and I don't say to shy it that we are having a history of intercommunal tensions, but they resolve by themselves since we are living together since thousands of years. And one positive thing between Hindus and Muslims in India is they are, I should not use the word, but I'm using the word. Sorry if it hurts anybody. Indian Muslims and Indian Hindus, they belong to same race and same culture. Religion is different. So finally, what happens if there is some tension may flare up for some time, then automatically things become normal. Both start dealing with each other in the normal way. There are some nut people who spread many things like that, but their numbers is very low. Majority of the people, let it be Hindus or Muslims, they are of same culture and same kind and same types, same skin. So they have to live together, and they are living together right now. Those things have gone away almost.
Yeah, obviously, we in the Middle East have seen the fallout from bad relations between religious groups, and obviously hope that India has, over the course of the last 70 years, enjoyed much better relations, certainly, than in the Middle East. And obviously, we all hope that that continues and gets better. So that's great. Let's move a little on
Yeah,
to
optimistic.
geopolitics.
Yeah.
Going to ask you some of the same questions you asked me. Obviously, in
Oh,
India's
sure.
different context of these. Let's start with China. Is this an opportunity for India? The fact that China is facing so much criticism internationally, that companies are going to have already started, moving some of their operations out of China. Is this a moment for India? And what is India doing? And how does India feel? Maybe it's not all good for India that China is facing this kind of scrutiny and criticism. Maybe it is. How do you see the China issue as it's been affected by the pandemic? How is India's view of China and the impact of China's rise on India different today than it was before the coronavirus pandemic started?
See, Indian relationship with China is about 5,000 years old, and we have good relationship with even with China. But the issue is that if you talk publicly today after the coronavirus crisis, there is anger among the masses because coronavirus originated from Wuhan, and since China is not cooperating with the global community for reviewing what happened, how it came into being, about the origins of the virus, China must cooperate. That is what we want. And if the companies want to go out from China and come to India, we don't have any issue. But as far as China is concerned, we are not against China. We are having good relationship with Xi Jinping as well. But China must cooperate, and this is our demand in the WHO meeting today. We are demanding that China must cooperate, and we want a investigation in the Wuhan virus or coronavirus case, how it came into being, how it went from animal to human being, what is the reason behind that, who was the case zero. All those things should come into public light, because this is the worst crisis which has affected globally after World War II. And even Owen, I will ask you one question. Even during World War One and World War Two, when it was there that the entire global factories were shut down, it was never in the history of the world when the whole business of the world have shattered. Even during World War Two, during World War One, Africa was functioning, Asia was functioning, Americas were functioning. The crisis was majorly concentrated till Europe and Japan and surrounding. But this crisis of coronavirus, all the business of the world has stuck. The wheel of business has stuck. So we need an inquiry. We are demanding inquiry even from WHO.
Yeah, I mean, just to respond to a couple of the points, or take off of some of the points you said. Obviously, what's different about this is we've all gotten a crash course. By the way, it's fascinating to hear you talk the epidemiology terms before. We've all gotten a crash course in epidemiology. I'll say I actually took an online epidemiology course because I wanted to really understand this stuff. I can't claim to be a scholar, but I wanted to really know the ABCs, and I'm certainly not alone. We all are learning it. But we've learned that a pandemic is very, very different than a war or a demand declined. I don't know if that's the right word. A demand caused recession or depression, even. That this is a very, very different kind of animal. And we've also learned, it's obviously gotten a lot of attention in international relations circles, the real impact on the downsides of the kind of globalization that we've had over the last generation that has amplified the effect of an event like this. So that it can't be even as contained, not to say that World War II was contained, but even as contained that World War II is. Of course, World War II was also a war, not a pandemic. That makes it different. But it was operating in a very different kind of world. So even though we called it a world war, it wasn't truly the entire world the way that this pandemic in some sense is. So again, that's made it very, very different. it's interesting to hear from what you're saying that India wants to keep this issue alive. The investigation against China, the diplomatic pressure on China. This is an issue that you want to keep alive, that you want to see move forward, that you want to be a live issue in the international arena. And it can be a live issue for a long time, potentially. Even if China agrees to this type of investigation, and the investigation is going to take time, there are going to be questions raised by this investigation. So this is, as I'm kicking apart what you're saying, this is a kind of opening for India diplomatically and in terms of soft power that India could potentially use to achieve some of its geopolitical goals. Very, very interesting to hear how you explain that.
See, we don't want to keep it live, but we want investigation. We want a conclusive scientific investigation so that we can be well prepared if there is a second wave of this virus, or even for future. We definitely, since we are also affected, we have a right. We have a moral right, we have a legal right to ask for an investigation. If supposedly a person of any country dies in another country, that country has got legal right to investigate if the circumstances are questionable. So many people have died in our country as well. We have a legal right and moral right as well. As far as geopolitical strategy is concerned, see, India is a member of and a leader of non-aligned movement. We are definitely very close to United States, we are close to Israel, we are close to Great Britain, but still India is a part of non-aligned movement, and we are non-aligned.
Wow. Let's move on, actually. Again, I'm going to ask you a similar question to ask me. Let's talk about the United States. Obviously, as you mentioned, this issue of U.S. international leadership is also, I keep coming back to this, been a huge discussion in international relations circles. I should say in parentheses, less so in Israel. I think people in Israel are less focused on this issue of American, quote unquote, leadership on the pandemic. Here, the approach was, we have a government, we have a military. By the way, the military was involved here. It's also interesting in elements of managing this.
I know.
Right. We have our own government. We have our own tools. Let's get at it and let's deal with this with the tools that we have. There's interest in international cooperation. This has been something that Netanyahu has moved forward. There is this now, it's called the Smart Nine, this club of small countries that also have succeeded in managing the crisis. And that's led by Sebastian Kurz of Austria, and Israel's part of this.
Yeah.
But there's less expectation or need for American leadership. How is this issue
I'm not speaking from my party right now. I'm speaking as a student of global geopolitics. This is probably the first time after the Second World War when the world is not looking at the leadership of United States in a moment of crisis. That's something U.S. Government must be concerned upon, because till now, any type of crisis came into world, the world was looking towards the U.S., but not in this crisis.
That's right. And I think the question, and it's pregnant in what you said, and it's such an interesting question, is, does the United States, say in simple terms, do Americans see that as a problem? I think you're right. Traditionally, Americans have seen that as a problem because if you leave, you get to set the rules of the game, all of that international relations stuff. And you're right. Now it can be argued that the United States is forfeiting some of those rights to set the rules in order not to have the obligations that go along with setting those rules. And again, going back to what you said about the Middle East, this is something that's not only a Donald Trump era feeling or worldview even, it's something that predates him and may postdate him. And it's interesting to see whether Americans think that is or isn't the problem. But I agree with you, it's so interesting to watch. And you're right, at the end of the day, consequential for American allies like Israel, or even though I of course take your point that India is in the non-aligned movement,
yes.
India also has an important relationship with the United States, certainly against the backdrop of the rise of China. So it's very interesting to watch.
Let me give you a hint. Let me give you a
Yeah,
hint.
yeah,
Uh, uh, Keep your eyes focused on Libya. We will come to know because there is a very different kind of alignment taking place. Russia has aligned to support General Haftar with whom? With Saudi Arabia, France, and Egypt. And all these three countries are allies, traditional allies of United States against Turkish-backed Tripoli government. So we need to have a close look what's going on in Libya because so much alignment is taking place.
yeah. An overlooked conflict that you're right could really give us hints about what's going
I
on far
never
beyond the
thought in
war.
my life, I never thought that Russia can come in a fight, in a military fight, along with Saudi Arabia, along with Egypt and France, against
Yeah.
Turkey, which is an ally of United States.
Well, again, that's a it begs the question there too. I think about Turkey, but that's again an entirely different subject. Two more from me. One, we talked about China, we talked about the U.S. I'm gonna ask you about Israel, although you mentioned it at the opening. But how is Israel seen in India? And of course, India still votes often, not always, but to some degree, with the Palestinians at the United Nations. That's always seen as something symbolic in the relationship with Israel. Is that something that, to what extent is that something that we can potentially see change in the years to come? Again, we've seen hints of that, I think, in the past couple of years in any event. But how is this relationship with Israel seen in India? And how is, for that matter, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict seen?
There are three tracks of diplomacy. Track one, which is government to government, top leadership. Track two, which goes from diplomats, and track three, which is public to public. Track one has been very good. Track two is also very good. Let me tell you one thing: your embassy in India, they are performing great, and I think our embassy is also doing well there in Israel. But now we have reached up till the level of track three when people to people contact has been established. Now let me give you an opposite example. Away from Israel, it's Russia. Traditionally, we were having very close relationship with USSR even after the collapse of USSR, and that relationship was all three levels: track one, track two, and track three. But even till day, we are having very cordial relationship, public to public relationship with Russians. So once this develops, there is no backtrack then you don't need to look behind, and this is developing very fast with Israel, and people of India really trust Israelis. We think that yes, in any crisis, if Israel needs us, we will be there to stand with Israel, and when we will need Israel, Israel will be with us. So this is where the things are going. So I'm very optimistic about Israel. And coming to the Palestinian question, we want a peaceful solution between Palestinians and Israelis, and we may help to bring Arabs and Israelis close because we are friends of Arabs, we are friends with Israelis. So I think we can be the best bridge among the both.
Yeah, I know. Of course, that would be appreciated. In the interest of time, I also would have, well, maybe we'll do it briefly. The issue of Iran. This has been an issue that at times has been an issue of some tension in the Israeli-Indian relationship. India has a very different perspective on Iran than Israel does. How do you see the Iranian issue right now? I'd say it at a critical time, but it's always a critical time in the Iranian issue. Uh, what what do you think of the U.S. of the latest in the U.S. maximum pressure campaign, in Israel's determination to say this is a political consensus here? This isn't an issue. It's an issue that has become a flagship issue for Prime Minister Netanyahu, but it's not only him in taking on the Iranian regime. What do you have to say about the Iranian issue and how India sees it?
See, we want that Iranians and Israelis should reduce their tensions. And as far as India and Iran is concerned, just try to look it as a geopolitics and strategic reason. We have got a very hostile enemy named Pakistan on our western front. And Iran has given us a port which is near Pakistan, about 20 kilometers from Pakistan. And we had already four wars with Pakistan. So we have to keep good harmonious relationship even with Iran and even with Israel. Because the biggest problem with India, vis-a-vis India, is Pakistani terrorism, Pakistani military machine, Pakistani intelligence, which interferes in our country. And the relationship between Iran and Pakistan are also not good. It is the same condition like Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Iran, Israel, Iran. Now you can get the whole picture, I think. You can summarize it. Saudi is close to you, Bahrain is close to you because of Iranian issue. Iran is friend of India because of Pakistan issue. They are also not very close with Pakistan. They are having issues with Pakistan, like one of our guys, they take the Pakistanis have kidnapped Kulbhushan Jadhav, for which we went up till ICJ, and still the proceedings are going on. They are Iran supported. Iran said that this guy was kidnapped in Iran by the Pakistanis. That guy is a prisoner right now.
Yeah, listen, obviously this is it's interesting as always to hear India's perspective on this. Always so striking just how geographically oriented it is. I don't know if Israelis always think as geographically as Indian thinkers do, at least on this issue, and frankly geopolitics in its most fundamental sense. It's always very interesting.
Let me tell you one more thing for the Israeli viewers. They must understand that India has so many neighbors and a very big coastal line. We have to manage also our coastal line. We have to manage Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was in debt trap of China, and up till a level that one of the very strategic location called as Hambantota port, when it was overburdened with Chinese debt, they have to lease it for 99 years to a Chinese company. Now Sri Lanka is approaching India that you help us economically so that we can pay the amount we have taken from China. Then there is a very small country named Maldives in the Indian Ocean. They were having a debt of $1.6 billion. So a very small country with very small economy, for them $1.6 billion is a huge amount. India had to give them that money so that they can come out of clutches of China. Then we have to also maintain that Bangladesh is one of the closest friend of India in our neighborhood. Very close friend of India. We want that it should remain a loyal companion with India rather than going to in Chinese lap. Then we have Nepal. We have to manage that as well. We have Bhutan. Some time back, there was a skirmish between Indian troops and Chinese troops for a land which belongs to Bhutan, and we have to save it because we are having treaties with them. So India, it's having a big neighborhood, big coastal line. We have to manage all those things as well, and we are managing very well. And it's not my party thinking. I am thinking for you guys also. I wish that the first country to recognize you should be Bangladesh, and let me tell you why. It's a very secular. It's a very secular country. Number one, it's a secular country. Another thing is that that country was made because your country was made because you were having all sort of violence upon you. There were camps and all those things were there. And the Pakistani troops, Pakistani army did the very same type of atrocities in 1970s with Bangladesh. Finally, India has to send its forces there to liberate that country. You guys were the first to offer recognition of Bangladesh as a country, though they went to Arabs. That's an old story now. Then that country went into religious order, then back again to secularism and constitutional democracy. It's one of the good democracy, not a strong, but it's a good democracy like Israel. I think Bangladesh must recognize Israel.
Now, there's talk from time to time there about this, but it always comes back to the same basic point, which is that the population there seems not to want it. But obviously, Indian help on that, I'm sure here would be very much appreciated. And just to tip off one comment, the Maldives, everyone thinks of it, you're right, as a tourist destination or a country that's facing the worst of climate change. But you're right, the geopolitics fascinating. I remember their election a few years back, right? Where the Indians
Yeah.
against or the pro-Indian against the pro-Chinese. Sri Lanka, the same thing, fascinating. I propose we end on a question that unites us all. The human impact, or the impact on humanity of the pandemic. There's talk about the pandemic changing the ways we work, that we'll work from home more, changing human values, that people will value the quote-unquote simpler things, or they'll have put more value in family. The pandemic will change cities and the nature of urban life. To what extent do you think that's true? Or at a more wider level, to what extent do people in India feel that these trends are going to outlast the pandemic and become something that's going to more permanently change the nature of what it means to be a human in the 21st century?
Let me talk globally, and you can put India also in that section. See, we had industrial revolution in which the manual labor was replaced by the machine labor, mechanical labor. Now it's a time for, I think, digital revolution. And the digital revolution was already coming, but this coronavirus has moved it much faster than it has to come. And now the world will face crisis of jobs also, because as things will become more digital, more and more digital, technology will overcome the human labor. So world must be prepared with the policies. Global governments have to be prepared with the policies, how to employ people. And also, when I was a child, we in India were having programs of adult literacy, adult education. Now it's time for adult digital education around the world. You have to make them digitally aware also, because there are many changes which will take place in society, like social distancing. We have seen one trend in Japan after SARS virus outbreak. The masking culture has come, that so much so that 30 to 40% people, when they go out in normal times, they are wearing masks. Now, when people are wearing masks, definitely they will be observing social distancing also. So things are going to change. And wait a few months, since the whole world was in lockdown. Let us see how the social impact of this lockdown will come. See, society is a living organism. I always maintain one thing. A society is a living organism. It's not a dead thing. And living organisms takes time to reflect the changes which have came. One positive, I'm a feminist myself, so one positive change might be men at home has started helping women. It must last. But there can be negatives as well. There can be fightings among couples, within families, and the reflection of which will come after a few months globally. No change can be seen in one day. Society is a living being, very living organism. So we have to adapt to the digital age. Society, we will see the social changes as well. Let's wait.
Yeah, I guess none of us know. This is so unprecedented, but I guess I come down in the view that I think less will change than many people think. I still think the human being is a social animal. I still think people will want to work and play, for that matter, around other human beings.
Yeah.
I think it's not an accident that now more than half of the world's population live in cities. Of course, there are other social trends at work. As you mentioned, there's industrialization. But I think part of it is that human beings want to be with each other. Not that, again, village life doesn't provide that, but an Israeli phenomenon whose branded name, at least on Facebook and on social media, is Naz Daily, an Arab Israeli from northern Israel, a Harvard graduate, brilliant guy who puts out videos. One of his latest videos is about how the impact of coronavirus will last a century because everyone will work from home. There's no need for an office. It will be wonderful because you can live anywhere in the world. More interestingly, it'll be wonderful because you won't need an American visa to work for Google or Facebook. If there's no Google office you need to go to, then why does Google care where you live?
Yes.
That I thought was very interesting. But much of the rest of it, I came away from the short video saying to myself, number one, I don't believe these changes will happen. And I also hope they won't happen. Not only because I'm a fan of social interactions. I mean, of course, I hope they have it on the margins. There'll be a little bit more flexibility in working from home to some degree. But I hope they don't happen because I hope that people will still value social interactions and in-person human interactions. And also because, of course, and this is what made me sometimes angry about that video and that argument. As you well know, you're in India. You're a leader in India. There are in your country hundreds of millions of people who cannot work from home. They don't have skill
Yeah,
sets that enable them to work from home. And if there's an economy that values people working from home, there are going to be hundreds of millions of people in your country and billions of people around the world, let alone millions of people in Israel who are left out of that. And it's an elitist vision, fundamentally, that if it is implemented could lead to inequality that it's on a scale that we haven't seen. So I hope that the hopeful message I take from this pandemic is I hope that it doesn't change things, at least in that direction and to that degree, and that the things that we valued that are no less the simple things and the important things like urban life, like working together as human beings physically, I hope those things don't disappear. Don't disappear after the virus disappears. And I hope that they come back once the virus disappears and once this unusual time in human history is over.
See, I have another point for that. What I think that it may result in a good society. How come I'm telling you that? Wages may increase. I think there is connection to, yeah. I think it will result in a betterment of human society in long term. How come I'm saying that? Because finally there are sectors like construction, infrastructure, building where you need human, and those people
Of
who are
course.
engaged in all these activities, they are among the lowest of the poorest of the poor. So their wages will increase as people starts working more from home. You can say the white collars start working more from home. These people, blue collars, or I use one term, without collar for them, because blue collar can be a person who is working in a different way, not physical working, though his pay is less. But these poor fellows, these poor human beings working without collar, their wages will increase in that condition, and that is beneficial. Plus, it will the governments as well as the private sectors will have to invest more in infrastructure. If the governments of the countries, any country, Israel, India, Belgium, anybody, they want to keep these people earning their livelihood, they have to invest more in development of infrastructure, because there you need human labor. And there is no another possibility that how can you do it digitally? You can't do it digitally. So
Yeah,
that
and
way,
one
our cities will be more beautiful. Infrastructure will also develop. With infrastructure, trade and commerce will develop. See, let me give you one example more. For betterment of even digital, you need optic wiring throughout the world, under the sea, under the land, along the railway lines. For that also, you need people who work with their hands.
Yeah, there's so much to say. I guess I'll just end it on one short note that the hopeful vision I have from this pandemic is that it will teach us that the physical interactions that we all took for granted are so valuable, and not just in the home, but in the public
Yes.
sphere as well, and in the workplace, and that the people who engage in those kind of public interactions, whether they be construction workers or others, that those types of interactions will be valued not economically in the examples you were talking about, but also socially and personally,
Socially.
and that this experience will make us all value them all more.
Yes, it was a very good interaction with you,
Same
Owen,
here. Loved it.
and we will again call you after a while for discussion,
Let's do it.
specifically between India and Israel.
Let's do it. Let's do it in a few months. Absolutely. And we'll check in and we'll see where things stand.
And from my side, lot of love to all Israelis from India.
Same here, and to everyone in India. And of course, to the people suffering, people sick from this pandemic, people lost their jobs, and of course, the people on the front lines in so many different ways who are doing heroic work all over the world.
We pray for them. We pray for them. Okay, thanks a lot. Owen.
Thank you so much.